The pacing is set for a professional, objective narration style. At exactly 2 p.m. local time on December 15th, 2025, a Russian Kilo-class submarine was quietly resting at the Novorossiysk oil pier. They were completely unaware that a formidable swarm of Lyutyy drones was already roaring towards the coast. These drones carried explicit orders to saturate the air defense ring in exactly 15 minutes. What started as a routine aerial assault was about to become a monumental, historic milestone. This marked the very first time in the annals of naval warfare that a heavy underwater drone would successfully execute a kamikaze strike. Unbeknownst to the Ukrainian operators, who were 13 kilometers away, nestled in the hills overlooking the port, a Krasuka-4 electronic warfare vehicle had just been brought online. The drone operator forcefully pushed the joystick to the left. Nothing happened. 3 seconds later, the drone belatedly reacted. It banked sharply, grazing a harbor crane. 3 seconds of lag at 150 kilometers per hour equates to 125 meters of blind flight. That is ample distance to either expertly maneuver around a structure or fatally collide with it. The altitude reading plummeted. 190, 180, 175 meters. Each digit was a further step toward impact. The Krasuka was drowning the drone in a cacophony of noise. It is like trying to whisper while a helicopter hovering directly above you rearranges your facial geometry. The signal indicator, which normally showed 70 decibels below maximum for full power, plunged to 110 decibels below the minimum, with just a single bar flickering in and out of existence. At 120 decibels below modulation, the connection would be severed completely. Just 10 more points and the drone would transform from a weapon into mere flying debris. But Ukraine had already mastered this dance. The drones began hopping between 40 frequencies per second, becoming impossible to lock onto. The Russian operator watched his screen flicker. It was as if he were trying to swat a fly that teleported every 25 milliseconds. The Russians stared at the sky, mesmerized by the apparent threat. And that was their mistake. Because 10 meters below the surface, far from the noise, the Marichka drone was advancing. 6 meters of steel, 450 kilos of explosives, no radio, no GPS. This was its first mission, and it was about to prove that death didn't come from the air. It came from below. However, 10 meters underwater, the war was acoustic. The Russian sonar operator stared at a screen full of noise. In the shallow waters, sound waves violently ricochet off the muddy bottom and pier pilings. This effectively blinded the sonar receiver. It is like trying to spot a firefly in front of a truck's high beams. Frustrated by the visual clutter, the Russian operator then activated the MTI Doppler filter. He instructed the computer to disregard any targets moving slower than 8 knots. He assumed any genuine threat would be a rapidly moving torpedo, a truly grave error. The Marichka's onboard AI detected the change in the ping pattern and stopped dead in its tracks. It dropped its speed to just 4 knots. The drone instantly vanished from the Russian screen. It was moving too slowly to trigger the torpedo filter, but it was still advancing. But above the surface, their luck was quickly running out. The aerial drones faced a physical obstacle. A row of 50-meter-high cargo cranes blocked their way forward. The drones had 2 options: crash or climb and become visible. The Lyutyy squadron leader climbed to 80 meters. It was a calculated risk. That altitude, however, lifted it out of low-level radar coverage, effectively making it an easy target for a Tor M2 battery concealed behind the fuel storage tanks. The Tor's radar lit up instantly. Contact, bearing 230, altitude 80. The launch was both vertical and intensely violent. The 9M338 missile accelerated to Mach 2.5 in less than 2 seconds. That is 850 meters per second. Death reaches you before you even have a chance to blink. However, the Ukrainian drone was already in a steep descent, plummeting towards the water like a rock. And then it leveled off precisely 5 meters above the rolling waves. This is precisely where Russian engineering fell short. The Tor missiles are designed with a fundamental safety rule. Their fuse won't arm if they are flying below 15 meters. This prevents the missile from accidentally exploding from radar ground bounce. At 5 meters high, that $100,000 missile is nothing more than a very fast, very dumb cannonball. A 165 kilo projectile shot harmlessly over the drone and self-destructed in the distance. But dodging one missile wasn't enough. There were more batteries waiting. The Ukrainians desperately needed a permanent shield. They ultimately found it in the colossal supertankers anchored in the bay. By flying just 20 meters from the ship's immense steel hulls, the drones effectively entered a technical shadow zone. The Russian radar couldn't lock the small drone without also locking the giant ship behind it. It truly was the perfect camouflage. To hide behind a giant while the sniper attempts to take their shot, as long as they stuck close to the steel, they were untouchable. However, the cost of remaining invisible meant tactical suicide. Flying in a straight line. To remain concealed behind the tanker's hull, the pilots were required to maintain an absolutely perfect line for a full 10 seconds. One mistake, a 20-meter deviation, and they would leave the radar shadow and be annihilated. At 150 kilometers per hour, flying straight while hunted felt unnatural, but that steel corridor was the only way to the military docks. They made it through the gap, but as they left cover, they entered the lion's den. At the end of the pier, the Alpha Predator was waiting, a Pantsir S-1. Unlike the Tor, this system isn't for general defense. It is a specialized drone killer. Its radar already had them locked. The Russian operator didn't fire immediately. He had spent a full minute studying their movements, learning their rhythms, just waiting for that precise moment when evasion would be completely impossible. At 2.2 kilometers, he pulled the trigger. 257 E-6C missiles launched simultaneously. It wasn't panic, it was calculation. A double launch creates a kinetic trap. If the pilot turns left to dodge the first missile, they fly directly into the path of the second. The projectiles accelerated to Mach 3, crossing the first kilometer before the launch warning sounded on the Ukrainian consoles. The first missile flew, guided by the truck's computer for 1.5 seconds. Then, it opened its infrared eye, seeking the engine's heat for the final blow. And right there, in the final second, the Russians' perfect plan fell apart. The 5.7 E-6C missile was specifically engineered in the 1990s with one sole purpose: to annihilate jet fighters. Large aluminum tubes with engines burning at 650 degrees Celsius, standing out against the cold sky like flares in the night. However, at the port of Novorossiysk, in the full light of day, thermal physics utterly deceived the Russians. Though Lyutyy drones have combustion engines, their thermal signature is tiny compared to the environment. The steel decks of the supertankers and the concrete of the piers, intensely baked by the afternoon sun, radiated massive heat. The missile's infrared seekers were searching for a heat source against the radiant background. It was just like trying to locate a candle flame within a massive industrial furnace. The operator of the third drone yanked the control stick, forcing the aircraft into a violent 6G turn. This intense force caused the carbon fiber structure to audibly groan and creak through the audio transmission. The missile flew just 8 meters above, near enough for the camera to record its escape plume. This plume was specifically designed to detect an aircraft's aluminum magnetic mass and then detonate the warhead. It failed completely when it encountered the drone's carbon composite construction, which rendered it undetectable. To the magnetic sensor, the drone was as invisible as a plastic bird. There was no detonation, merely a $500,000 rocket ascending into the sky until gravity ultimately brought it back down. But statistics is a cruel science. The second missile found the fifth drone in the formation. This time, the fuse worked. The warhead detonated 15 meters away, transforming into an expanding sphere of 2,000 tungsten and steel fragments. Most of them missed their mark, but 3 fragments managed to tear through the fuselage, ultimately shredding the fuel tank to pieces. The video signal began to violently spin. Sky, cranes, sea, then sky again, before cutting out to gray static. First confirmed kill. The Pantsir operator didn't celebrate and immediately launched 2 more missiles. The third drone, the one that had survived the first missile, was still regaining speed after its 6G maneuver. With no kinetic energy, it was a sitting duck. It couldn't evade a second time. The direct impact transformed it into a fleeting orange fireball and a cascade of debris raining down onto the water. Within a mere 5 seconds, 2 drones were neutralized. Yet the remaining 4 survivors continued their relentless advance. But beneath the surface, this was precisely what the Marichka drone had been needing most. Tons of metallic debris and flaming engine parts violently slammed into the water's surface. For the Russian sonar operators, the sound of the debris hitting the water created massive noise spikes. This masked any subtle frequencies. The acoustic chaos from the aerial destruction became the perfect invisibility cloak for the underwater drone. As the sky was ablaze, the silent assassin stealthily advanced another 500 meters, completely undetected. But when technology fails, war reverts to frightened men pulling triggers, just as it always has. On the concrete breakwater, which enclosed Novorossiysk Bay, 3 Russian Marines were the sole barrier remaining between the approaching drones and impending disaster. There were no fire control computers or complex radars here, just the Eagle-S system on their shoulders and their own eyes, squinting against the blinding afternoon sun. The corporal in command activated his launcher's thermal battery. He felt the cold shock on his cheek as cooling gas flooded the missile seeker, dropping its temperature to minus 190 degrees Celsius in an instant. For the missile to kill its targets, its eye must be colder than the vacuum of space. Desperately searching for a speck of heat in the sky, the soldier aimed at the lead drone. He waited for the steady, high-pitched tone indicating a perfect target lock. Instead, he received an erratic, stuttering sound in his earpiece. The system was confused. The thermal contrast was the problem, in fact. A drone's engine generates little heat. Against a cold blue sky, it shows. But here, the drone was flying low, with the port cranes and shimmering water as its backdrop, acting like giant mirrors reflecting solar radiation. To the missile's sensor, everything was glowing. Everything was hot. "I've got no tone!" the corporal shouted, sweating under his helmet. But the order was to fire at will, with or without a lock. He pulled the trigger. The missile shot out of the tube with a dry roar, deploying its fins. It truly was a blind shot. The seeker head, utterly maddened by the sun's reflections on the waves, mistook the water's glint for an engine's exhaust plume. The missile took a violent nosedive and slammed into the sea, sending up a harmless plume of water 50 meters from the target. The other 2 soldiers didn't even shoot, their weapons lowered, defeated by the environment's physics. And it was precisely that plume of water from the failed missile that sealed their fate. No one saw the disturbance in the water, merely an elongated, shadowy form gliding just beneath the surface, precisely where the missile had impacted. The Marichka drone took advantage of that perfect curtain of distraction. While the Russians were cursing the heavens for their abysmal aim, death had stealthily made its way into their very home through the unguarded back entrance. At 14:15, with their missiles spent and the soldiers blinded by the sun, the Russian defense collapsed. The leading Lyutyy drone successfully struck the P-18 early warning radar. Without this radar, the defensive net couldn't see threats beyond 50 kilometers. The drone dived directly toward the rotating antenna. Upon impact, the hollow-charged warhead detonated, creating what weapons engineers refer to as the Monroe effect. Here is the science that makes this so lethal. Inside the warhead is an inverted copper cone. When detonating, the explosive doesn't propel outwards, but instead collapses the cone inward upon itself, transforming the solid copper into a hypersonic jet of plasma that travels at an astonishing 8,000 meters per second. That is 25 times the speed of sound. At such a velocity, steel armor won't shatter. Instead, it acts like a liquid. The plasma jet sliced through the radar mast like a hot needle through butter, instantly vaporizing all its internal components. 20 seconds later, the second drone precisely aligned itself with the formidable Nebo U radar, truly the crown jewel coordinating all of the S-400 missile batteries. Destroying this was akin to severing the very optic nerve of the Russian military. Every soldier within a 500-meter radius opened fire. PKM machine guns, AK-47s, even pistols. However, the chances of striking a target moving at 150 kilometers per hour using only iron sights are almost completely non-existent. The drone slammed into the phased array, pulverizing $20 million of technology into metallic confetti that then rained down upon the complex. The port of Novorossiysk was now completely deaf, blind, and mute. The stage had been perfectly set. No one would ever see what was about to unfold beneath the water's surface, with the base's eyes now utterly destroyed and utter chaos reigning on the docks. The Marichka made its final, stealthy approach. The sonar from the drone detected the distinct acoustic signature of the Veliky Novgorod, a Kilo-class submarine. It was moored, completely motionless, heavily loaded with torpedoes, and bristling with 4-caliber cruise missiles, all poised and ready to be unleashed against the Ukrainian power grid. It was a steel coffin, waiting to be sealed. Unlike the air attack, there was absolutely no warning here. There was only a dull thud. The Marichka drone detonated its 450 kilograms of explosives directly below the waterline, right at the torpedo room's level. And this is where the physics of water becomes terrifying. In air, an explosion loses energy quickly because the air compresses and absorbs the shock. However, water is incompressible. When half a ton of explosives detonates underwater, the shockwave has absolutely nowhere to go. It travels at 1,500 meters per second, striking the submarine's hull like a massive, solid hydraulic hammer. The powerful explosion generated an enormous gas bubble, which forcefully lifted the 3,000-ton submarine, shattering its keel, and then plunged it into the abyss as the bubble swiftly dissipated. Satellite photos later confirmed the immense devastation. It wasn't merely a hole. The pressure hull was completely torn apart, suffering catastrophic internal damage that naval experts unequivocally classify as a constructive total loss. In a matter of 15 minutes, Ukraine had not only blinded the Novorossiysk base, it had made history. For the first time in naval warfare, an underwater drone had hunted and destroyed a conventional submarine. The Russian fleet had fled from Sevastopol seeking safety, but at the bottom of the sea, they learned one final lesson. In the era of drones, there truly are no safe harbors left, only targets that simply haven't been struck yet.